All right, everyone. Thanks everyone for joining us this evening. We're here to talk about the 18th Street improvement study. We'll wait just one more minute here. We got a number of folks who are in the waiting room that we're admitting. So we'll get started here just in a minute here. We're calling it the 18th Street improvement study. We're really talking about the area over kind of on the western side of downtown, 18th Street, Fleur Drive, Locust Street, and Grand Avenue, where they all meet. And so thank you for joining us this evening. We'll show up on the screen here pretty soon here some instructions on how the meeting will work and how we'll operate Zoom. So let's give it here just a minute here. Okay. John Davis, do we still have any queuing in the waiting room? I don't see any quite yet. There may be some folks who still may join us, but
got everybody out of the waiting room for now.
Okay, got everybody out. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. My name is Steve Neighbor, city engineer for the city of Des Moines here. I've got a number of folks from our city team here. Pam Cooksey from the city manager's office, Tom Block, deputy city engineer, John Davis, city traffic engineer, Corey Bogenreef, principal traffic engineer, Jeff Wiggins, transportation planner. So a number of city staff on the call. I've also got a few folks from our design consultant, FHU, that are on here who have been helping us. They've got some traffic engineers who've been helping us perform this study, led by Mark Messinger, and so they're going to be also helping with the presentation as well. So again, welcome everybody to the public virtual public meeting for the what we call the 18th Street improvement study, which focuses on the area on the west side of downtown, where Fleur Drive, Locust Street, Grand Avenue, and 18th Street all kind of come together. They're kind of some obscure, atypical intersections, that we're talking about here. So if you could go to the next slide, Mark, I want to cover just some, again, I appreciate everyone's patience in going through a virtual meeting. Obviously, to be honest, we'd much rather be doing this in person in an open house type format, where we can lay out the roll plots and talk individually one-on-one and get a lot of feedback. But obviously with our pandemic, that's not not the way we're operating, and we want to keep our projects and efforts moving forward here. So thank you for your patience and working through the technology, through technology and meeting virtually. In terms of Zoom, the way we're going to operate, I'd ask that we're gonna give you a presentation, and then we'll have a time period. We'll open it up at the end for questions and comments. And I'd ask that you raise your hand, and that way we can kind of conduct the meeting orderly and make sure folks are not interrupting each other. And so as you raise your hand, we'll work with you to unmute you, kind of similar to city council meetings if you participate in a city council meeting. And the way to do that is hopefully you see on the bottom of your screen, if you're on a computer or laptop, you'll see a couple ways to do that. If you click on the participants icon or the three buttons on the bottom, there should be options on there to click on raise your hand if you'd like to speak. And then you can also lower your hand as well. And then there's also commands to mute and unmute yourself. If you're on a phone, and so you're not seeing that menu bar, if you're on a phone, press *9 to raise your hand. So if you're on a phone, press *9 to raise your hand. And then to unmute or mute yourself is *6. So the commands on the phone are *9 to raise your hand and *6 to mute or unmute yourself. So again, thank you for being patient with us with that format. And so if you could go to the next slide, Mark. Again, the purpose of this meeting is, we really the gist of it is, and Mark will cover it in more detail, but the Wastewater Reclamation Authority is planning to construct a very large storm sewer, about 6 foot in diameter, through the area of Locust Street, Grand Avenue, and 18th Street. And really the bulk of the work, or really starting in late 2022, with the bulk of the work being in 2023, where this work will happen. And so while it is 2-3 years away, we've in response, we figured with the large sewer coming through the area, this gives us an opportunity to take a look at the street network and see, are there any improvements that we could make to this area, since a lot of it's going to be tore up with the large sewer coming through. And so the city has hired FHU, Mark and his team, to help us do some traffic modeling and also develop a number of alternatives to talk about. So we've developed some concepts. We'd like to kind of share that process with you and share the concepts we developed. And then we'd like to get feedback from your comments before we start the design process. And so, while we may not have all the information and all the details, we like to have kind of a virtual open house early in our design process, so that way we gather feedback that we can incorporate when we begin the detailed design. And so, our city, if hopefully many of you are familiar with our MOVE DSM, or Transportation Master Plan, our main goal is to provide a transportation system that is usable and safe for all users. That's pedestrians, bicyclists, transit users, and motorists. And so that's one thing that all of us, I would actually ask everyone to keep in mind as we go through this process. And so, Mark, if you can go to the next slide here. Again, this is kind of the team that's kind of all involved. Again, we talk about some of the city staff that are on the call: Felsberg, Holton, Olivig, Mark and his team, and then Veenstra and Kim is a consultant that's on board. They're also have been procured by the Wastewater Reclamation Authority to design the large sewer that's coming through this area as well. So with that, Mark, I think the next slide is I'll turn it over to you if that's all right, and you can kind of go through and talk about the area and what the project is.
Okay. Well, thank you, Steve. Again, I'm Mark Meisinger with Felsberg, Holton, Olivig, or FHU. We've really enjoyed working with the city on this project and are excited to share with the public here some of our findings and the process of the study. So the first slide that we have here is the study area. As Steve was mentioning, there's a large sewer project coming through that's depicted by the dotted yellow line, this Ingersoll Run sewer project. So we had looked at a number of different intersections in the study area. And you can see, there's some different traffic signal icons and stop signs that show what the existing traffic control devices are out there. There's also a number of other factors in the area, including the Fleur Drive Bridge project. There is some scheduled project to do some improvements on that facility. Some other things in the area include some river crossings of the Raccoon River, both on Fleur Drive and the two bridges on Martin Luther King Jr. Parkway, or MLK Parkway. There's the Iowa Interstate Railroad that runs along the south side of the project area. That actually, if you look, the Fleur Drive bridge spans that, and Martin Luther King Jr. Parkway, the connection to there on 15th does not. That's an at-grade intersection. So that was one of the things that we considered when we were looking at our different alternatives. And again, there's a number of different streets here. A lot of these are one-way streets today, and there was some look to see if there was any need to turn those from one to two-way, or if you wanted to keep it in that configuration when this new project comes through. So again, that's kind of the area that we looked at. As I mentioned and Steve alluded to, there's this Western Ingersoll Run sewer project coming through in the yellow line. It starts kind of on the east side of downtown here by the river, comes along MLK, and then comes up through the study area, primarily on 18th and Ingersoll, and through the project area here. So when that comes through, as Steve mentioned, it's going to be a large sewer pipe that's installed. It's going to really tear up the roadway, and it's a good opportunity for the city to take a look and see, are these intersections really set up in the configuration that we want for the next 30, 40, 50 years, or maybe is there something else that we can do to better meet the needs of the traveling public and other folks that are using it in the project area. So this is the internal study area. This is kind of the main focus of our project. Again, in the red line, basically goes from 19th Street on the west to 17th on the east, Locust on the south to Ingersoll on the north. And again, we looked at some other intersections that were around the periphery of this, but this was kind of the main intersections in the middle of the study area that we evaluated. Again, we've got the traffic control here. Most of these are signalized intersections. I will point out that the intersection up here of 19th and Ingersoll currently is, you have to stop if you're on 19th, but on Ingersoll you can go through. There's no control on Ingersoll at that intersection. I will point out too, there's a number of different businesses and users in the study area. And we've tried to identify those on each of the buildings here. We did have some early and ongoing communication with several of these entities, and we wanted to make sure that we were meeting the needs of those major users and employers in the study area, as well as DART. DART has some transit routes that run through the area, and we wanted to make sure that we were providing connectivity and accommodating their needs as well. So the goals of the project, there were a couple that were identified early on. As I mentioned, you want to plan for these future street improvements with the WRA project that's coming in. There was a goal of improving walkability and cycling and the infrastructure on the western edge of the downtown area. Kind of seeing this as the west gateway into the downtown. These intersections really are very atypical, and they encourage high speeds with traffic moving through. The design is probably from the 50s and 60s, and at that time really the main emphasis was getting traffic as fast through the area as possible. What we'd like to do is make it a little more inviting for pedestrians and bicyclists and other users, as well as cars. There was, as I mentioned, a look at converting some sections of one-way streets to two-way, and we'll talk about that in a little bit, both on north-south and east-west. Steve mentioned the move DSM. There is a long-term look at making Grand and Locust two-way traffic. So that was a consideration in the project. I mentioned the Fleur Drive Bridge work. That's going to be a future project, and the area stakeholders. So all of that coming together is how we looked at our study area and evaluated different alternatives. So there's a number of different things to talk about for existing conditions here, and we've got some numbered circles here that identify some of those issues that I talked about. Number one, there's a ped crossing up at that 19th and Ingersoll intersection that I mentioned. Really, there's a lot of students at Central Campus that choose to drive and park north of Ingersoll, and they end up walking across Ingersoll at this intersection. We'll talk about that in a little more detail, but there's a pretty heavily used crossing there for pedestrians getting to and from Central Campus. There's bus parking along the frontage of the Central Campus buildings, along Grand Avenue, south side of Grand Avenue. I'm sure if you've been through there during the school day, you've seen a line of buses and seen them operate in that area, and it's not necessarily the optimal configuration today. I think there might be some room for improvement there. There is an elementary school on the campus, kind of on the southeast side of the building, and there is some parent pickup and drop off. Wanted to make sure that we accommodate that with any of our plans. As I mentioned, these atypical intersections are somewhat confusing for pedestrians and other users. I'd like to clean that up. Again, the Fleur Drive Bridge. Number 6, there's an art installation there on the Meredith green space that we don't want to touch. We want to make sure that's maintained. And then again, the bike connectivity. And I will point out here with the bikes, we would like to get them through the study area, and both to the east and west, but then also to the south along Fleur. Currently, there are some sidewalks and things, but some upgrades to the bicycle facilities was something that was mentioned as a need for this area. So as I mentioned before, there's quite a bit of pedestrian counts here at 19th and Ingersoll. we did see in a count that we did in November, that there is November of 2019, that there were about 123 pedestrians that crossed in the heaviest time period from 11 a.m. to 12 p.m. or noon. That number does support having some sort of marked crossing or control device across Ingersoll. Right now, if you've been out there, there's really not a marked crosswalk. And so we would like to see some improvement there. That was something that we looked at as part of the project. We also looked at some other times during the day, and we've shown this at some of the heavier intersections here, including 19th and Ingersoll and 19th and Grand. So again, all of those areas, we want to make sure that we're providing sidewalks, crossings, and a safe design for bikes and peds in the area. We also looked at safety and intersection safety. We pulled 5 years of crash data from the Iowa DOT database. They do maintain what they call a statewide average crash rate, and that's 0.80 crashes per million entering vehicles. And basically that's just a way to normalize crashes at any intersection. So if you look at the study intersections that we identified, 1 through 8, we have them ordered here. The intersection of 18th and Locust was the highest crash rate of any intersection in our study area. But I will say that all of those intersections were below the statewide crash rate. So that was a good sign. But we do want to make sure that when we're developing alternatives that we keep, vehicular movements in mind and make sure that we're trying to keep that crash rate, below the statewide average. We also conducted a traffic operations study. We looked at 3 different years: the existing year, 2019, 2023, the projected build year when everything would be open, and then 2040 is our future year. So usually we look at about 20 years out from existing to make sure that we're designing any facilities to accommodate future traffic. We looked at the AM and PM peak hours and your commuting peak hours, and also the midday. As I mentioned, that's a lot of time when pedestrians are at their highest activity in the study area. And I will say on the right side of the screen here, we looked at what's called level of service. And it's kind of like school, it's graded from A to F, A being the best, F being the worst. Unlike school, at least for me with my parents, D is an acceptable level of service. If I came home with a D on my report card, it probably wouldn't be very good, but that is an operations goal. The reason that we identify that as our operations goal, if you try to identify something like an A or a B, you really end up overbuilding your system, and you're spending too much money for very little benefit. So D is a pretty widely accepted goal, both in Des Moines and across the country. And I will mention, we did look at potential improvements with and without the Fleur Drive bridge in place. There was some question as to whether or not that bridge would be replaced or if it would be decommissioned. And so that was one of the components of the study. So we ended up developing a number of different alternatives, and we'll talk about a number of those here today and show you some drawings here. So just in order, we've got a no build or the existing conditions. We have what we called alternative 1 with signalized intersections. Alternative 2 was very similar, but it had some free right turn movements. We had a roundabout option where we replaced some of the internal intersections with roundabouts. A project or an alternative where we would remove 18th Street as a through connection, and another one where we'd remove both 18th Street and that Fleur Drive bridge as facilities for vehicular traffic in the area. So I'll step through each one of these. Again, the no build is just what's out there today. I won't spend a lot of time here. Alternative 1 is our signalized intersection alternative. Basically what we did here is took the intersections of 18th with Grand and Locust and just squared them up and teed them up, and would make more of a normal 4-legged or a 3-legged T intersection. They would both be signalized. Alternative 2 was very similar, except for at the intersection with 18th and Locust and Fleur, we left those sweeping right turns in there. Again, that would encourage some higher speed traffic, which was not necessarily one of the things that would meet the goals of the study. Alternative 3 was a roundabout alternative. We did look at a fully functional roundabout. You know, all of the movements would be served here at the north intersection, and at this south intersection of Locust and 18th, it would be more of a what's called a teardrop design. If you got in there, you'd have to go all the way around. We felt like, you know, this with the geometry of the intersections and some of the space available, this was a potential alternative and was worth evaluating. Alternative 4A was the one that would remove 18th Street. And so you can see here, we're replacing the street as it is today with quite a bit of green space. We've got a pedestrian way or a sidewalk that goes north-south, but we don't have a street connection that goes all the way through. To make the movements in this configuration, you would continue east on Grand, go south on 17th, and then you would either make a left or a right, depending on which direction you wanted to go at 17th and Locust. It would maintain the signals at each one of these intersections and kind of square them up and make them a little more typical. And then alternative 4C is very similar to 4A, except for that we would remove the bridge here for vehicular traffic. And by doing so, you would also remove part of Locust. You wouldn't necessarily need that open for vehicles. We did show some conversion of that to trail or, you know, ped and bike facilities. With this alternative, we could potentially remove the signal here at 17th and Locust. So when we go through an alternatives evaluation, we want to identify evaluation factors so we can look at each one of the alternatives and see not only that traffic level of service, but other impacts and factors that are out there so we can compare them against each other. So we look at things like right-of-way. Interesting with this project, we really don't have any right-of-way acquisition proposed with any of our alternatives. Usually on a project of this scale, we would have some right-of-way, but there's a lot of room to work with here, so we didn't necessarily have that. As I mentioned, our traffic operations, we want to look at the bus operations and the school pickup and drop off. We do have identification of at least preliminary cost estimates and the ability to phase those improvements. As I mentioned, ped bike connectivity, access management or impact to business access with each of the alternatives. And then at the bottom here, we identify whether or not we would propose to advance these alternatives to another round of analysis or eliminate them. We did have some what we felt like were fatal flaws with some of our alternatives. As I mentioned, that alternative 2 with the free rights and signalized intersections, we felt like that wasn't conducive to pedestrians, and it really wasn't that much of a difference from alternative 1. So that alternative got knocked out early in the process. And then this alternative 4C, when you remove the Fleur Drive Bridge and 18th Street, that caused some of our intersections to blow up. You know, if you have traffic diversion to other facilities to make that work, you know, it would make that operate at a level of service F, which we deem to be not acceptable for this project. So again, we tried to color code these with green being the best, red being the worst. And so you can see, you know, when you look at everything in totality, our recommendation would be for this alternative 4A. And again, this is alternative 4A. We do show here, you know, we've got some different projects we identified. We wanted to make sure that we could phase this project. And so I can step through that in a little more detail here. So along 18th Street, we would provide a north-south bike connection in the area with this alternative. Again, removing 18th Street between Grand and Locust. that gives us some ability to have a pedestrian area and some green space. We did hear from the school that they have some uses. The elementary kids go over to the park area or the green space and use that as their playground. Also, when they have fire drills and different things, they end up with kids lined up on the bridge, and they really would like a place other than that to stage some of their, fire drills and other things like that. We felt like there was an opportunity to improve some of the pickup and drop off activities at the school. And again, removing this barrier of the street between the park or the green space and the school. On 19th Street, we would provide a north-south vehicle connection. We're proposing a conversion of that street from one-way to two-way. We would, with that, add a traffic signal up here at Ingersoll. That would, number one, allow you to get out if you're a northbound vehicle with a signalized indication rather than just taking your chances with a stop sign. And number two, it provides that safe pedestrian crossing. As I mentioned, we saw over 100 pedestrians crossing the street there, kind of during that noontime area or time frame. And really that's something that we want to make sure that we have the ability for them to cross safely with the signal. Also, the condition of 19th Street today is somewhat broken up, and it probably is due for some pavement repair and upgrades. So we would replace that pavement and sidewalks in the area. Along 17th Street, again, we would convert 17th Street from what today is one-way southbound to two-way traffic between Grand and Locust. As I mentioned, we'd be removing 18th Street, so that connection moves over here to 17th. We are looking at providing some dual right turn lanes here at 17th and Grand. There's enough traffic using that movement today that you really can't get away with one right turn lane. You need to have two. And then that feeds into this southbound dual left as well at the intersection of 17th and Locust. Would make some traffic signal modifications, most particularly here at 17th and Grand. Would have what's called a bike scramble phase. So if a bicyclist is here and they push the button, they get their own phase, or they can go diagonal across the intersection. We are moving there's a bike lane on the south side of the street here that we would then transition to the north through this intersection. And that's done with that bike scramble phase. And then also there's a bus stop here with DART that we would maintain that stop. And there's also a B cycle station there that we'd be maintaining both of those facilities. We're also looking at some improvements on Grand Avenue. The area from 17th to 18th, we would propose to convert to two-way traffic. As I mentioned, having our dual right turn lanes here, but we would have a single through at the intersection of 18th and Grand. We'd want to convert Grand Avenue to the west to a 3-lane cross section west of 19th Street. There have been some studies in the area previous to ours that looked at that as a future project. And we think that we can tie that in. And by doing that, we are providing a dedicated area for bus staging on the south side of the street. Right now, basically, it operates as a 3-lane roadway if you drive through there when the buses are there. So we just wanted to make that official and do it in the correct manner here with striping and signing and whatnot. We would be rebuilding the intersection of 18th and Grand, including the traffic signal, and then doing some modifications here at 19th and Grand. As I mentioned on the other slide, providing some east-west bike connectivity through the area so we can get both north and south along 18th Street. There would also be some improvements on the Fleur Drive Bridge and on Locust Street. We would be converting Locust from 17th to 18th to two-way traffic, modifying that traffic signal to accommodate two-way traffic to the west. We think that there's some extra capacity on the bridge based on the number of vehicles that are using it. And there should be the ability to take that bridge down to one vehicle lane in each direction. And that allows for some improvements to the bicycle facilities on either side of the bridge. So you can get kind of north and south along Fleur Drive, where today you're on a very narrow sidewalk. So again, this is that recommended alternative, again, zoomed out. And that's what we'll be recommending as part of our project. So Steve mentioned the project timeline. Again, we'll be wrapping up our study here at the end of 2020. This is kind of our last major milestone as to host this meeting. As he mentioned, we'd really like to be in person, but just with the pandemic, it's not really in the cards this year. So the city would be moving into design of recommended improvements in 2021. It's likely to be a few tweaks and modifications to what we've shown here, but generally that recommendation is hopefully what will be carried forward. And the construction of that would occur with the WRA sewer project, which would be, as Steve mentioned, late 2022 and into 2023. So in summary, we were asked to provide this comprehensive planning study of the 18th Street area, evaluating traffic operations and safety performance. It's a good opportunity to do that when the sewer project is coming through, and if they're going to be ripping up the road, that putting it back in the configuration that would be desirable for the next 20, 30, 40 years is really what we're trying to get at here with this project. We do want to get some stakeholder and public input. We're looking forward to some questions and input here in the meeting. Hopefully that can help guide us and do any modifications as necessary to our plans here. There is some contact information. I think it was in the meeting invite, but there is an email address here. If there's particular questions, maybe you think of something after the meeting or something that's a little bit longer that you don't necessarily want to ask tonight, feel free to send it to this email address. And then this presentation and other documents from the study are going to be available on the city's website. Again, there's a link here, and you can go there to get more information. That's also in the meeting invite for tonight. So with that, I will turn it back over to Steve and possibly John for some question and answers.
All right, thank you, Mark. So that concludes the presentation. We now like to open it up for questions. So again, if you could raise your hand, either with using the menu bar. Again, there are a couple options to using the participants, or the three dots where it gives you the option to raise your hand. Or if you're on a phone, remember it's *9 to raise your hand, and then *6 to unmute. So, all right, so we'll get started here. We got Mike Armstrong. Mike, you should be unmuted.
Evening, everyone. Thanks for the presentation. I know it's a small segment, but I was curious if you've done any life cycle cost comparisons between the street removal and the other options. I saw that the street removal has a slightly higher initial cost, but over the 30, 40-year period, you're looking at snow removal, repaving, all of the day-to-day costs. I was wondering if that balanced out.
And I guess from an analysis standpoint, we didn't necessarily look at the life cycle costs. That's certainly something that can be done. A lot of times when you have a project like this, you'll go into what's called a benefit cost analysis. And so you'll look at things like, your snow removal and operations, the time for drivers and delay time. That wasn't necessarily something that was part of this part of the project, but it is, I think, something that goes into some of your CIP decision making. Is that correct, Steve?
Well, and I guess just to clarify, Mike, are you referring to Locust Street? Is that the section of Locust Street and the Fleur Drive Bridge? Sorry, let me find you again.
Yeah, I think it was for option 4A. Yeah, so that closure for 18th from street to green space and sidewalk.
Yeah, I think the challenge from going from 4A to I think it was 4C, right, Mark, where the street is gone and the bridge is gone, is really more due to diverting more traffic. And Mark, correct me if I'm wrong, but diverting more traffic to either Ingersoll and or Southwest 16th Street, which Southwest 16th Street is at grade railroad crossing. So then you lose that aspect of it. And I know only 8, I think there's 8 trains a day that go on the Iowa Interstate Railroad, but they tend to go pretty slow. And so that diverting the traffic, we didn't feel it was desirable to send more to Ingersoll and or Southwest 16th to that condition. So that was really more what played into that, the keeping that than.
Yeah, I was wondering more the comparison of 4A to say 1 or 3, which left 18th open.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So there would be some, benefits actually without having the street connection here. There are some other benefits, if you take away the signal there, you would have some additional delay and some other things that would occur at that intersection. As I mentioned, though, we didn't necessarily take the delay and convert it into, which would kind of be identified as a cost. But certainly I think that's something that can be done. Usually you have a BCA when you get into your CIP, correct, Steve?
Yep. Okay. 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 I have Ray Frederigal. And I apologize if I mispronounced your name. Ray. Let's see if we can.
Hi.
Ray, you should be unmuted. Yep.
Yes, I am. My wife Susie owns Funky Finds Vintage and Retro, and we're going to be moving the business back into the newly remodeled Argonne building in about a month on the corner of 18th and Grand. So we like alternative 4A. Our concern is the construction phase, obviously. Is 18th Street going to be completely closed during the sewer construction? Is it all going to be torn up?
Let's see. Do you have the map, Mark, of the sewer route here?
Sure.
We could pull that one up. Yeah. So I mean, the sewer, it's a 6 foot we're looking at about a 6 foot diameter sewer, and so it would require closures of the street, and so I apologize, I'm not sure if Bob Beanster's on the call yet, but they haven't got to the level of designing the staging plan. They'll have to try and stage it to try and minimize impacts to the area and minimize the amount of area that's disrupted and closed. But certainly with a sewer that size, I mean, we can't sugarcoat it. This is going to be, I mean, we're talking completely tearing up the streets to put in like I said, a 6 foot diameter sewer.
So all the parking on 18th Street will be gone. Parking's already an issue for us, and I understand it sounds like that's just going to happen. Is Grand going to be torn up at the same time and the parking impacted there as well?
Well, during the sewer comes up where 18th Street, where kind of as you can see in the yellow line there. So I don't know, the sewer wouldn't impact other than going through Grand.
But the street will have to be closed while it goes through Grand, right?
While it crosses over Grand, yes, yeah.
And then it goes up Grand past our parking as well.
Yeah.
So we're pretty much, we lose all of our parking
And if the
and
street's
pedestrian
closed,
traffic really, and exposure.
Mhm.
if the street's closed.
Yeah, and the intersection, we wouldn't anticipate that. So the sewer project, and I don't know if see if Dave or others are on there, but the street project, the sewer project, while it's probably a 2-year project at least, it's not the intersection itself wouldn't be closed for that full time. It would be closed while they're crossing the intersection.
How long do you anticipate that would be?
I don't know that answer, unless Bob Veenstra or I
It's
don't
like-
think they've done the design or the staging yet. So
Steve, it looks like Greg is on the call. I don't know if he's able to be unmuted. There you go.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now, Mark. Construction across the street like that really should take no more than a couple of months. There's probably things that we can do to do perhaps half at a time to help accelerate it, but the design for the sewers in place, but we really haven't staged that area as of yet.
Well, this is going to affect my ability to do business on that corner. Are you going to be offering any grant money for small businesses that have to close for 2 to 3 to 6 months because we can't continue business? What do you suggest? How are we going to be able to stay in business while this construction occurs?
well, I mean, our goal with the design will be to minimize impact as we can and provide access. We don't intend to close access off the bill to your business, but obviously, yeah, there'll be long durations where the parking, the on-street parking in the public right of way is gone because of the sewer going through. So, and then to answer, yeah, there is no programs for programs or even a way that city or the wastewater reclamation authority could compensate for business. I hope you can understand that. Obviously, that argument could be made for construction all over the city. You know.
Well, coming on the tail end of the year of COVID and what it's done to our business, there's no surviving a closure of the street and loss of parking once we move back and our rent goes up for the new space and everything else. That's our concern, is the construction.
Okay. Thank you. I appreciate that, Ray, and like I said, that's we have folks from Veenstra and Kim on to as well as our design team to hear that, and so that can be obviously strongly considered during the design of how do we stage and minimize the impacts, especially in that sensitive area.
Hey, Steve, this is Dave. I just had one question for Ray is it, and this is something working through the plans, is it just the parking on 18th Street, or would it be, if parking is maintained on Grand, is that,
Well,
is that, I know that's better, but is that,
most of the parking's on 18th Street. Parking's already an issue down there. People tell us all the time in our current temporary location we've been to that when we were at 18th, they would circle the block looking for parking. If they couldn't find it, they left. And that was with all the streets open and everything. Any space lost on 18th or Grand hurts us.
Particularly with students.
okay. And that's something, working with the WRA and just knowing what that will help the staging plan through that area too. So just trying to minimize, like Steve said, that time is going to be critical, is limiting the time up through 18th Street from Grand up to 8th, from Grand along 18th from Grand to Ingersoll.
Yes, yes.
I will say, as part of the project, once it's done, we are showing parallel parking on both sides of the street there.
It currently is.
Yeah,
it currently is, and then putting that back.
and that's great. It's just, surviving the transitional period is the question.
Sure.
Yeah. No, thank you, Ray. Thank you. Okay. All right. I see Tyler Strub. So, and I apologize. Tyler, let me unmute you.
Yeah,
Okay,
Tyler Strub here.
Yep.
I live over by DMU, so west on Grand, west of MLK. Has there been any thought or consideration for those that travel east and westbound, west of MLK there, as to how I guess this proposed interchange is going to affect the interchange at Ingersoll and MLK? I think this new plan is making an assumption that those that want to access MLK are going to, I guess, head into the western part of downtown, and I don't think that's going to be the case. I just worry with all the current construction improvements on Ingersoll that we're going to potentially jam up that road that's been designed to be more pedestrian friendly.
And we did look at the intersection of MLK and Ingersoll. As I mentioned, one of the alternatives that 4C would have taken away the Fleur Drive Bridge, and that intersection was one that actually went to level service F, which we determined was not desirable. And so that particular alternative was not carried forward. But I do know, there's some design projects for Ingersoll to the west, and maybe Steve can talk more in detail about that.
Yeah, I mean, there obviously, some folks, especially that live up in your area, they could make the choice to cut up to Ingersoll instead of in this case, obviously people who you would currently, if you say you want to go south to the airport, you would, currently be able to kind of almost free flow south through the Fleur Drive Bridge. Now you'll have to go a block out of the way. So there is that, but there is that possibility that folks could divert up to Ingersoll. However, again, we are continuing to move forward with the Ingersoll improvements to further enhance what was done earlier was a road diet and make it a more pedestrian and bicycle friendly corridor as well.
Yeah, and we did feel like that diversion from 18th over to 17th was, you're pretty much a block or 2 blocks out of direction. We felt like that wasn't that far and that people wouldn't necessarily divert it. The number of lanes that we have shown here should accommodate the movements that would be making that. I just feel like that would be feasible with this alternative that we have up on the screen.
Okay, that makes sense. I was just more curious, in this particular plan, was the assumption that 100% of the cars that were headed east and west down Grand would take this travel path, or did you account for maybe 50% of those vehicles that would travel up to Ingersoll and on to MLK that way, and thus potentially leading to an F for that particular intersection?
Yeah, with this, I think that it was kind of an 80-20 type split. And when we do a study like this, we're usually, we might have something that we report. We also do some other alternatives that we look at, if we turn up the traffic on one leg and we take it away from another, what happens? So that was part of this project, kind of seeing if you divert more or less traffic, will it still work? We want to have a little bit of kind of factor of safety with that, with our plans. And again, that's why your goal is lower service D. You can theoretically get a little bit more traffic through there and it's still accommodated. Again, we feel like this configuration should accommodate the traffic levels that would be expected.
Okay, thanks. As someone who regularly bikes through that intersection, I appreciate you taking into account the pedestrian and cycle paths through there. That's great.
Thank you, Tyler. Okay, I have Carol. Carol, I'm going to unmute you here.
Awesome, thank you. Is there staging area planned for this project that will also impact the streets or other areas of the project area?
For the street project, we haven't gotten into that level of design yet. Usually construction phasing and staging is something that you would look at in what's called preliminary design. We're more in the concept phase now.
Okay.
I'm not sure about the sewer project. I would imagine it's probably a similar answer, Greg. I don't think you've probably gotten into that level of detail yet.
Mark, yeah, the sewer layout is essentially done. I think we feel pretty good about that. But we're really just starting to look at the staging and the construction aspect of it.
Okay, because sometimes I'm presuming, you know, you had Kingman torn up for a long time at like 28th or so. And there was, you know, an awful lot of other stuff that took up a lot of space. Is it, I'm presuming the impact is going to be similar to what was like along trying to get through Kingman, right?
Is Dave on? Dave, are you recalling that?
Yeah, so the issue at Kingman and 28th, that would have been probably a little bit smaller diameter sewers, you know, and so once the design gets a little bit further down, I don't foresee us expanding into like the school property or anything like that for staging area. So I think a lot of the staging will occur in the streets. So
okay, I was just picturing that new green space is probably going to be used for all the stuff before it becomes a beautiful green space is what I was, it looks kind of like the right place for it. But
that's a great question, but it's also how do we, you know, before we get the streets realigned, if that's the route we go, and before you remove that street, we kind of need to, we don't want to start piling everything in the way while we're still using the street. And that's where the staging and staging plan and traffic control plan come into play during the preliminary design. So
yeah, and that
okay.
yeah, and that's right. That this obviously won't be an easy staging plan, and maybe it's probably going to get into the complexity of, well, you know, and I'm just totally spitballing here. That again, this has not been developed, but you know, what if that one block of Grand was converted from one way to two way? You know, then maybe the equipment could shut down that whole area, you know, block off that whole area. And again, I not to sidetrack, but that is a big benefit to why the city does ultimately plan to convert Grand and Locust to one way to two way, because of things like this. Because to be honest, the one ways do, one, they can encourage higher speeds, and two, they present a challenge when there are events or closures for construction or water main breaks. So,
okay.
Yep.
Thank you. The new green space that's going to be created. Oh, I should back up. This looks really great, by the way. Yay. I'm a new resident to the city. I'm a bicyclist as well. And that area that, you know, the 18th Street around Central Campus and all that is really great. That new green space that's going to be created, will that become part of this existing trail? Owned and maintained by the park district?
You're breaking up a little bit. I think what you're asking is if that green space becomes a park, or, you know, owned by the city or maintained by the city.
Yeah. Yeah.
I believe it would be, because it's currently city right away, unless there would be some kind of, and Steve, maybe you would want to speak to this, dedication to somebody else.
And again, that's something we haven't worked out yet. That is a good comment, because, you know, would Meredith want to expand their green space, or how does that interact with, again, the school using it? again, I'll be honest, as a parent of elementary age children, I love the fact that we're adding the more green space. It does obviously say concern, not having to have the kids cross this obscure set of intersections and roadways. It's going to be a huge benefit. So we don't know that answer yet, but that is a good point. That's something we got to work through, of the ownership, maintenance, and even what the green space looks like, as well.
Right. Okay. Yeah. The whole maintenance cost. Okay. You mentioned the Fleur Drive Bridge and talking about expanding it for more ease in biking. That Fleur Drive Bridge is scary to drive on, let alone, I never would even consider biking on it, frankly. What sort of bike safety measures are you talking about? Besides, you said widening the sidewalk. The cars are going so darn fast along there. Are you thinking about any protected lanes at all, or any sort of bollards or anything for bikes on there?
We, as part of the study, we did look at a couple of different cross-section options. Again, that project would be a separate project that would probably need some more design before you could answer the question. But at least what we see is that we only need one lane of traffic in each direction for the traffic volumes that are using the bridge. And that would give you some space to widen out today it's a sidewalk, but you can make it a wider, like a bike trail or a path, and provide some protection or like a wall between the vehicle lanes and the bicycle lanes. I would agree, I wouldn't necessarily want to ride my bike on it today with some of the higher speeds and how close you are to the vehicles, but
Yeah.
there is some room for improvement there on both sides of the bridge, and I think we can do some things to dress it up a bit. There's a lot of room to work with there too.
Okay. And then my last question, you mentioned something about at Grand and I think 17th, where there was going to be this big bike scramble where you'd have to hit a beg button to get it to work. Yuck, yuck, yuck. That doesn't sound safe at all, frankly, as a bicyclist. And Grand, at the east end of Grand, where you have to go from one side to the other to stay in the bike lane, is bad enough. But having to go diagonally sounds not fun to me.
Yeah, it definitely is a challenging location. We looked at some other options to bring, bikes on a side path through there, or maybe having some kind of other place where you would move to the other side of the street. The one advantage with this bike scramble phase is that you're the only ones in the intersection during that time. So you do have some time that you're the only person moving across the intersection. So hopefully there wouldn't be vehicles trying to go through there at that time.
Well, but you have to hit a beg button to do this, which means you have to go up on the sidewalk, go over, kind of halfway get off your bike, hit a button. Is that what you're saying?
That's one way. I know there are some other places around the country that have some, bicycle detectors that are in pavement. Those are traditionally somewhat hard to maintain, though. You really have to turn up the detection to be able to get the bike, because usually you're trying to detect a car, so it's got a lot of metal.
Right. Right.
It also has been done with some video detection and some other things. So I know the city's been looking at that. We would be looking at that in further design phases.
Yeah, and the city at many intersections requires you to sort of get your bike all the way up on the sidewalk, and sometimes aren't even big buttons on your side of the street to get the light to even turn green if you're the only one at the intersection, which is really a bad experience for a bicyclist and encourages unsafe behavior. So I would just encourage you to think really hard, a little bit harder on that intersection from a bike point of view, because that doesn't sound desirable or safe at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
I do know some of those locations, if they don't have a push button, a lot of times that's because the the pedestrian indication comes up automatically?
Well, I have about 5 or 6 that I currently go through today that are very frustrating. And when you discover a new one, because it's counting down the other way and you're thinking, oh, it's going to turn green. Nope. It just stays green. It just stays green going the other way. It's very frustrating. It's not a good experience.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I have Jessica. Jessica?
Hello, this is Jessica Gogarty. I'm the director of Central Academy. We're at 19th and Grand, right next door to Central Campus. I work with the director of Central Campus and also the principal of the elementary school, the downtown school, which is right there on the eastern end of the complex. So I also work with the Des Moines Public Schools Transportation Department in scheduling our buses that run through there in a normal year. Of course, this year is very light, but normally that's very bus heavy there on Grand and in this area. So first of all, I want to say thank you so much for this design. I like that there's a place for our buses to stop and load and unload. That's very helpful. I also would like to encourage you to invite me to your staging plans, because I can be very helpful in thinking about how we route buses during the construction process. And then lastly, at 19th and Grand, if we make that a two-way, right now that the mouth of 19th going into Grand is very narrow, and buses often have to cut that corner to make it all the way around to come into the space. If we make that two-way, we may want to widen out that mouth a little bit to make turning more feasible. I know 19th is really chewed up, and there's telephone poles that are right up next to the road and a few other things that make it a very difficult road to navigate. And I noticed that a lot of drivers, and including bus drivers, will not always take it as 2 lanes. They'll just drive down the middle as if it's one lane because of the roughness of that road. So I'm excited about the improvements to 19th Street, but I would recommend maybe widening out the mouth a little bit just to make turning, because those buses can be, especially our big buses, can be quite unwieldy around that corner. And that's all I have to say.
Thanks, Jessica.
Excellent.
I know one thing that's done when, when you get into more of the design phase is applying bus templates to your designs. We do that in the conceptual phase too, so we did take a look at some of that. But if you do know the length and the types of your buses, that's something that can be put into the design, make sure it all works.
Fantastic. I can get that information for you.
Okay.
All right, thank you. Okay, I have Jeff. Jeff, I'm going to unmute you here. Let's see here.
Good evening, Mark and Steve. Jeff with Meredith Corporation. I guess I would like to tell you guys that 4A seems to be the best solution out of all of those. I really like the fact that we are eliminating 18th Street. And it appears that you've removed all the parking spaces from in front of our as you call, garden trowel or planter, which I'm sure the Meredith family will appreciate, not having cars parked along that north curb of Locust at that point. We do, I know it's early, but I would like to open up discussions about how we would modify the crab apples that are currently along the curve, the arc of, I guess it's 18th Street, and work with you guys on modifying the landscape architecture in that block. I know there's a couple things that you've noted there, extensions of some walking paths, but there may be some other things that we would certainly be open to, and then working and partnering with you guys on how that's developed, and obviously down the road how it's maintained. I guess the only thing that I'm curious about, which I know we're early on, is the entrance at 17th and Locust into our main building. which we refer to as Locust South. I don't think Locust North will be an issue, but Locust South, when that road is torn up, there will be some things we'll have to just coordinate on because of that disruption. But otherwise, looks great. And thank you for inviting us.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Jeff.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thank you. Yep. Okay. Great. Okay. All right. Let me pull up my screen here. All right. Michael Harris.
Hey guys.
Yep.
Looking at alternative 4A, I would say I like the design. The one area that I'm most concerned about, being a cyclist, I live downtown, west side, and I ride and I drive Grand Avenue extensively. One thing that's nice about Grand is that there are 2 lanes of traffic, which allows cars to change lanes when they pass me. So it kind of makes me not like the area that it's restricted to a single lane of traffic. So I was kind of curious on whether or not there was any thought to the bus pull-off location, whether or not that could be pushed into the, it looks like the sidewalk's already set back through that area, but maybe there's a row of trees, it looks like, with like some concrete approaches out to where the buses are kind of parked in that image, whether or not that space could be used for the bus pull off and then stopping it before that traffic light at 19th Street. Just because past there, I know there's not the space for them, but I also know that the buses along that area, when they pull, when they have 2 lanes to, you know, they have a lane to pull out into when there's traffic still coming down that road. And myself, and what I've noticed, most traffic when we come through that area during the school timeframes of that bus activity is to use that far outside lane, knowing that buses are pulling in and pulling out of there. I know that they do what they can to, like, sometimes make maneuvers where a rear bus will pull out to block the lane for the buses in front of them to get out into that traffic. So it definitely makes me nervous anytime we're restricting that whole stretch at all to 1 lane of through traffic, even all the way out to 17th, it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
If it was 2 lanes straight through, yeah, exactly. That's my biggest concern along there. And then coming up the hill when I'm on my bike, the scramble thing, you know, take it or leave it. I've already usually changed lanes and get into the far right lane way ahead. And I'm already riding that right lane down through that section, the park between 17th and 18th, back to 16th even. I'll have already gotten over because most of the heavy traffic is just west of all of that for the most part. And it already kind of slims down as we come into Grand Avenue. But like I said, I like to stay in the far right lane and cars just go around me when they pass in the left lane. And then of course, coming downhill, the 2 lanes works great for the bicycling too, for reasons of passing and such. Those are really my only comments other than Fleur. You know, I guess that would be a nice improvement with the wider. There is no reason. I've biked that bridge on the sidewalk and on the lane. I can understand how some people find the lane a little bit more scary down there with the faster speed cars, but there are so few that oftentimes I can just time it out and ride across that thing and not encounter any cars. It doesn't always go anywhere heading south. You know, it doesn't really hook up to much very well. And if I'm leaving downtown and heading south, I usually have already crossed over MLK and gotten onto the path that heads, you know, down and around there to the park already. So Fleur, I don't think I've cycled that thing more than a dozen times in the past 6 years. Those are about my only comments.
Oh, thank you, Michael. And that is definitely, to say the least, a challenging area in front of the school. And Mark, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think, you know, obviously the four lane roads, especially in this area, do provide a challenge for one, a concern for erratic maneuver. I mean, you know, people aren't may or may not be expecting the buses to just, you know, I mean, right now they stop, you know, in the travel lane. And so they may or may not be expecting that and then making erratic maneuvers. And so the thought was just to actually define it. And honestly, also, you know, go into a 3-lane is a traffic calming measure to, you know, to reduce speeds in there. But it definitely is a challenging area to navigate with a bicycle, especially, you know, again, I've done some pools. I've gone kind of during the middle of the day to do some activities between the city and the school where we mentorship type activities there, and I noticed it's kind of, I don't want to say chaotic, but there's students coming and going and drop offs, and so it is a challenging area, especially for a bicyclist to navigate through.
Yeah, that's kind of why I was like, it would be nice if those buses didn't pass 19th Street and that traffic light where those children are crossing a lot. I mean, that's what I've noticed is that when they get loaded in there with all those buses and then you have the traffic light going, it's a lot going on right there. And so if we could eliminate that, I know it's a few more spots for them, but
so
you're work really well, especially when they're pulling in and pulling out of there.
So you're, Michael, you're talking just if there's a way to look at eliminating the spaces east of 19,
yeah,
that would help. You're thinking?
I think just because it's, you know, it just creates more confusion right by that intersection with all the kids that are standing out there. I've seen them dart between the buses and then they're standing right out in the lane of traffic, and then that one lane of traffic, because those buses are sitting and blocking the one lane, you tend to get a pretty consistent flow of cars going along there, and the kids are stepping out in some cases right into at that point a high volume flow of traffic. That's why I just look at, like, if there was a way to stop it before 19th and push them back a lane and give them a lane to be able to pull out into, plus have the travel lane then on the other side of them, and keeping that 2 full lanes straight through so that they can use one. Would just be
okay. Well,
I know that there's some different trade-offs here, and one of the things that we were looking at was you know, how wide or how many lanes that we needed to have on Grand eastbound. If you notice, we only have the 1 lane at 18th going through the intersection eastbound, and then we widen out once we get to 17th. Again, there's trade-offs there as far as, you know, impacts to trees and other things and the existing paths. So again, that's a lot of stuff that will be taken into consideration in the preliminary design phase.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for the comments. And that's something like Mark hit it on the nose, as we kind of actually put more detailed, you know, when we actually have, you know, like more survey, detailed design, that's something we could talk with the school district and Jessica about further, as, you know, like how many spaces and where they are and whatnot as well.
I just wanted to make one more comment. The woman that spoke earlier regarding the traffic lights, I believe most of my encounters cycling downtown, most of the traffic lights are all timed. So there is no need to push a button or to do anything. You just wait for your cycle to happen. So I've always found the one-way, the whole western block there to work really well cycling wise, and haven't had really any issues with it at all. So that was my only comment on that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. Larry James. Unmute. Okay, go ahead, Larry.
Hey, thank you. Thanks, Steve. First of all, I really appreciate all the work that staff's done on this. This is and the consultant. This is a great improvement to what's there. It also sets you up, as you said, for future projects, which is terrific. And I just had a couple questions and some comments. But are we looking at, I mean, just roughly like, for example, at 18th and Grand, is there about a 55 feet curb to curb there? And on the design, or is it 44 or what, like basically at a little farther up at the, right in front of the apartment buildings being renovated right there.
Josh, you still on? You got a number there from our team?
I guess maybe it's even easier to answer. Is it 4 or 5 lanes at that intersection?
Yeah, I'm still here, Mark, and you're talking at 18th and Grand, correct?
Correct.
So we do have eastbound 5 lanes, an eastbound left, an eastbound through, and an eastbound right.
Right.
Westbound are 2 lanes. On the east side of the intersection, that section is reduced right there to 4 lanes, 1 eastbound through, a westbound left, and 2 westbound throughs at that location as well.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Mhm.
And Steve or someone, is the plan to incorporate the signals you guys are putting in? Will those be the new type that you could eventually network to the system the city is trying to roll out?
Yeah, that's correct. Since Corey Bogenreef and John Davis have they've initiated the ITS Intelligent Transportation Systems Master Plan, and so now, so you're absolutely correct. The new signals will have the new controllers, which allow for better opportunities for active management and optimization.
But I just asked a question because I wonder if with that ITS system, when it's fully operational, if there's a way for, for example, at this intersection just talked about 18th and Grand, is there a way to eliminate a lane of traffic, make it all a 3-lane through that from 17th to 18th? But at the same time, I don't know if this is a possibility or not. Is it with ITS, can you say, hey, they're backing up schools, it's 8 o'clock, so there's schools coming on, we got to keep this green for a period of time. I mean, or even with a turn signal, a left turn green, if with the ITS, does the throughput get more efficient from a car travel standpoint if you're able to have the ITS, and then therefore, maybe eliminate a lane for other uses?
One of the things that we did with our study was evaluate the lane configuration at all of these study intersections. And westbound on Grand, at least through 17th and 18th, we really do need that additional through lane. We tried to make it a single through, and it just didn't have enough capacity for the traffic that's out there. That is 1 less lane than is out there today.
Sure. No, yeah, it is. It's definitely an improvement. I think it's a much safer design than what we have today. This is just, basically, take this as constructive criticism, do what you will. But I'm just trying to understand. So then because one of my thoughts as I was listening to the small business owner talking about their issues at the corner, that building is looking amazing now. If you haven't driven by recently, it's just terrific. And if there was an ability to somehow eliminate a lane in front of that, along that area, you could, either widen the sidewalk another 6 or 8 feet, or add parking along the street further west from where you're showing it. And then the traffic counts you're using for the design, are those traffic counts you guys did on site, using meters, or did you rely on DOT counts, or?
There's a combination. So there were some counts that were done as part of that Move DSM study a few years ago. There's also a couple of intersections that we did new counts in the fall of 2019. and that establishes the baseline. And then all of those are projected to the future based on information from the MPO.
Yeah.
They maintain the traffic model.
Sure.
So the existing year is kind of what we use as our baseline, and then we project out based upon the MPO's, the best information that they have available. And like I said, we looked at 2023 and 2040.
Because I'm looking at the the DOT's 2019 counts, and from on Grand, there's anywhere from 7,600 to just under 11,000 west of MLK, and then I'm looking at Locust is like 7,000 basically, and like the bridge you're talking about that you're doing a 2-lane. The Fleur bridge is 6,100. So right. I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of what the move DSM plan itself says, which is 3 lanes can easily handle 15,000 cars a day, upwards of 20,000 if necessary. But that's why I was asking about the ITS, if there's a way to incorporate using ITS technology to further address those peak hours when we take care of some of that congestion.
There are things you can do. Sorry, there are things you can do with a variable lane. Like for instance, you could have 2 lanes in one direction in the peak hour, and then you swap one of the lanes and make it go the other way.
Right.
Some of that stuff is in some places it's integrated, but it does require a lot of compliance from drivers and other things that maybe, again, is a future improvement that's possibly outside of the, beyond 2023.
Right.
But again, it's something that's out there. It's just not necessarily widely implemented.
Sure. Yeah. The question is what, none of us know the answer. What's going to happen to downtown office use, or, it's impossible to judge that. We only have the data you have, right? So it's hard to tell what post-COVID is going to be like. I guess, if I was to wave a magic wand and make this already good plan, better in my mind, it would be to eliminate as many right turn only lanes as you could, and see if, like I already mentioned, the 3-lane configuration.
And sometimes we do that for lane balance. So, rather than just killing the lane off and making you merge, you turn into a right turn lane or a left turn lane.
Gotcha. Well, especially right when it goes from two-way to one-way. No, that's totally understandable. Only just a couple other comments. I'm excited about the bridge to Fleur proposed changes. Obviously, those won't happen for another five or so years. But what do we know the structural life of the bridge? Is it coming up on its end of its structural life?
It's not. There's just there's one particular span that we've got to do some repairs to, but typically when we rehab a bridge, we can easily get another 25 years plus out of it. I don't know if
Got it. So it's not, you don't have to completely rebuild the bridge. You're just going to have to repair it, and it'll be good.
Yeah, it's mostly a rehab. It's mostly a rehab. That there is one span that we're looking at that we may have to replace on one particular span.
And this is outside the scope of the project, but it's, as you're looking into the future, I think the amount of traffic going on that bridge is even going to decrease more from the 6,100 or whatever you're showing now to probably, I'm just, another like 1,000 or so cars a day, I guess, and just to go down it. I look at that bridge and I think it'd be amazing to keep the bridge, but turn it eventually into a full-on linear park, almost like that, even though it's not as attractive, that old stone bridge in Minneapolis, across the river there. But I think, you'll have to see how this project works to start before you start looking at that. But that's just something to keep in back your mind. And finally, the only other thing, again, it's just a question. Is there any opportunity for any pedestrian islands like you've done at at the school on University, just at what, about 58th and University. Is there anywhere along that stretch between 18th and 18th and 20th, I guess, or MLK, that there would be a opportunity for a pedestrian island to address some of those safety issues of kids crossing the street like that?
So, yeah, I don't know if that's Mark, if that was considered. I mean, so I guess just, and again, I'm totally spitballing, Larry, just to get off your idea. I mean, so you see how you have the hatched median just east of 19th.
Yep.
So like if the main crossing was shifted to the east leg, then that would be obviously an opportunity where you would make that a refuge island, right? I mean, is that kind of what your type of thought?
Yeah, and I don't know where it may not work at that
Right.
stretch with all the things going on there, but I think I got a dog. But anyway, that's all I had to say. I think, again, I want to thank you guys for working through this time overall. Dealing with their own things at home, and it's a great plan. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry.
And I guess talking about pedestrian refuge islands, like Steve said, you could do it in that hatched out area if that was desirable. We would want to try to funnel all of our pedestrians crossing the street to the signal.
Right.
We wouldn't necessarily want to have a pedestrian island a few 100 feet east or west and have people crossing mid-block there.
Right.
But
yeah, that's why
further to the west might be a consideration.
Right.
That 19th and Grand is really the main intersection where people cross, and that's with a left turn lane to make it wouldn't be impossible to do an island there, but that's just another offhanded comment of
sure.
Yep.
So, but otherwise, yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Ray, let me unmute you here. Whoops. Hope I didn't.
There we go. My wife, Susie, wanted to say something.
I just, sorry, I'm Susie. I'm the one who owns Funky Finds on the corner of 18th and Grand. And I wanted to tell you guys that you really have done a spectacular job, and hats off to you, because this is beautiful. And the first impression you gain of downtown Des Moines is this intersection. As you come down the hill, you're going to see this green space, and it's just going to set the tone, and it's beautiful. And I'm very lucky that I'll be able to look out my front window and see this glorious space that I'm sure will be used for all kinds of fun activities. Mm-hmm. So thank you for all the hard work that you've done and all the hours you've put into making this just as lovely as it can be. Thank you. And I think that it looks like it's going to be extremely functional. And I want to thank Larry James for his comment about potentially taking out an extra lane for parking. Right now, we share parking with Central Campus students. So parking really is the #1 issue that we face at that intersection. So please take that into consideration as you finalize your plans. And please keep us in mind for the length of time that businesses may have to be closed in order to get those 2 projects completed. But I didn't want to leave you. I wanted to leave you with with gratitude and with thanks for the beautiful job that you've done, because you really have created a fabulous space.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Okay. Do we have any other comments or questions? I can't thank you all enough. These have been fantastic, to say the least.
Looks like we've got Michael has another question.
Okay. Oh, yep. Michael, sorry about that. Michael?
Yeah, I was wondering if you could speak more on the desire to eliminate one-way streets. As a pedestrian, and again, a fairly heavy use pedestrian, I do a lot of walking, take my little girl on walks downtown quite a bit, and cycle most of the streets downtown on a regular basis. I've always found one-way streets to be far safer for me. That basically, especially where I get one ways in all directions as far as like intersections, you know, a one way to another one way crossing. It's eliminating a lot of the conflicts that can happen. And then by using one side versus another can also improve conflicts and risks. So like as an example, crossing Locust Street, let's say on 10th Street. So before, if I was walking over to Starbucks was to the west originally, and would get a lot of foot traffic to it. So if you crossed that Locust, you didn't have people turning onto Locust heading west. So you only had traffic coming from one direction that you had to worry about. And you didn't have turning traffic trying to happen from the cross street when you had the crosswalk and they have a green light and everybody's trying to use that space. So now, like, just because they moved a high foot traffic volume business to the other side of 10th Street, you now have a lot more people crossing the street on the east side of 10th, which then creates a lot more conflict with the left turning traffic coming down 10th onto Locust. So just thinking like I just never really understood the whole desire for people to get rid of one-way streets. Like I said, it just seems to reduce conflicts by half immediately. That's my only comment.
I'll just say, planning and traffic engineering standpoint, one-way streets can carry a lot more traffic. Usually you have a number of different lanes to put traffic to, but they also, as mentioned earlier, sometimes they encourage higher speed. And when you're trying to get more of a pedestrian environment, we'd like to have speeds and reduce the potential for conflicts. So the higher the speed, the more, if you get hit by a car as a pedestrian, the more damage can be done to that person. So
sure.
The other thing a lot of times you'll hear is like if you have a one-way street, you only get your major amount of traffic in your peaks direction. So like if you're on Locust, you might only get a lot of the traffic in the AM and you don't much. And so sometimes that depresses a little bit of the commercial viability of the property along those streets. Where if you make them two-way, you have more flow in both directions throughout the day. But certainly, it's something that's been debated for a long time, and it's I guess at least now the trend is going more towards converting one-way streets to two-ways. I don't know, Steve, if you have other comments.
Sorry.
Yeah,
like most of the locations along Ingersoll Locust and stuff like it's kind of like destinations. People are intending to drive to this restaurant or intending to drive to this location, and they just drive there versus random window shoppers that are just driving by and then all of a sudden deciding, oh, hey, I'm going to stop here, in support of the two-way versus the one-way, I guess, trying to entice people to a business or something like that. I was kind of curious on the road closure aspect of it. I believe Stephen had mentioned earlier how we sometimes close roads. It seems like the biggest closures downtown outside of construction are like the big events. They tend to close both lanes on either side and use that street space on both Grand and Locust, let's say for the art festival and stuff like that. So really two-way streets in those cases I'm assuming wouldn't change that effect, right?
Well, the two-way, I mean, obviously you think of, and you hit it right on the nose. The downtown, I think it's a huge number. It's something like 250 to 300 events in like a certain time frame that we have downtown, which again is something that makes our city great. Obviously the one way to two way, it helps one from a traffic flow more options with working with DART and how, those routes. If we shut down one of the one-ways, then obviously then that all the traffic gets rerouted to, in some cases, we route them up to Ingersoll during festivals. And so, so the events is a perk. I mean, I think realistically, Mark hit it on the nose. I mean, yeah, obviously there's no question the one-ways allow you to, it makes it easier to do progression of traffic. So timing the signals, right? Because you've got the less number of movements. You talked about, you talked about the reducing the number of conflicts from the left turning movements. But in general, and I know Cedar Rapids has gone through this, there's definitely the benefits in terms of, creating kind of that friction on the street in the sense of, one, wanting to get slower traffic. The slower traffic on a two-way configuration tends to, one, it provides safer aspects for the different users of the street, but it also tends to provide better business exposure, than the one ways of the faster flow. To be honest, to get to move traffic faster. It also tends to have benefits of, one ways tend to have those more complex intersections at the couplets where they change as well. It tends to be, a benefit as well. So,
what are your thoughts on how Locust is configured now with 2 lanes, parking on both sides, and then people crossing mid-block, obviously, to restaurants and businesses that are on the south side of that road tends to happen quite a bit. Mm-hmm. It would just, again, seem that traffic coming from one direction makes crossing that street like that in unmarked crossings and stuff like that safer, is my only other comment, besides the fact that the timed lights are, I think, critical to downtown. Makes the traffic flow fairly smooth. Speeds I've never seen speeds outside of when the kids come down there late night on the weekends and sometimes drag race. Luckily they get caught by a red light, so they tend to not be able to speed much more than a block at a time. But just from my experience down there, the timed lights work really well for walking. I've never had an issue as a pedestrian in most of those blocks downtown. The timing has worked out really well from a pedestrian standpoint too. I can walk pretty much from this western gateway all the way to the river and I'm not a tall person, so my gait's not that big. So my walking speed, but a comfortable pace, and I can hit green light after green light and just not even have to break a step and stop at one bit. Walking, cycling, driving, all you got to do is find the right speed, and it's just perfect. So I think a lot of it's really good downtown.
Great. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you. Okay. All right. Do you have any other comments, questions? Again, I can't thank everyone enough for all your participation and time and your patience as we continue to work with the pandemic. A lot of outstanding comments. We heard comments discussing the bike scramble at the intersection of Grand and 17th. With looking at that, obviously, lots of comments, and there's no question. The concerns for the construction staging, business access, and parking staging during construction. Also, the comments that we heard, Jessica, 19th Street approach to Grand, addressing the turning movements there. Obviously, very much appreciate the comments from Jessica, as well as Jeff with the Meredith team. Obviously, extending to be involved through the design process, and then comments on the Fleur Bridge, right? Is that we are excited about the plan to reduce that bridge from four lanes down to 2 and increase the pedestrian bicycle facilities on that bridge substantially. But then the comment of, well, continue to monitor in the future. How how will traffic function in the future on that bridge as well. I can't thank everyone enough for their comments. Again, this is our concept stage. Mark, are you able to go back to the email address and the page there with the, there you go. So yeah, again, if you think of things after the meeting, or you have colleagues or acquaintances that would like to provide comments, they're right there is on the website and the email address to provide contacts and additional feedback if you have additional questions. Those of you who are stakeholders right on the corridor certainly will be more engaged as we move into design next year. So thank you so much for everyone's time, and I hope everyone has a safe and wonderful holiday season. So
thank you.
Thanks so much, Mark. Appreciate